Alrighty, CNT120. We are working on our Chapter 6 lab on wireless networking. We have a copy of the lab direction page downloaded, ready to go, and we have our packet tracer file downloaded, launched, and ready to go. So what we're dealing with in this with this lab is over here on the right side is a section of the network to act as the ISP. So we have some servers and devices over here that are acting as like websites and that sort of thing in our network. So we'll use that as our ISP. Over on the left is the equipment at a site. And if I jump over to our packet tracer file, we have a router connected from our site into the ISP. We have a switch here, we have some phones here, some workstations here, and so we have an existing like corporate network, if you will, and we're going to add in the access point and the wireless devices to this network. Now, before we actually do anything in here, part one of the lab, I want you to take a look around. We're going to look at the switch and the configuration of the switch, then the router and the configuration of the router, learn a little about what's already here before we add the wireless in. So on our switch, I'm going to open the switch up here, go to the configuration tab, the command line interface tab up here. This is us actually connecting into the switch to actually look at or configure the switch. We're going to use the enable command. That gets our prompt here to change to the pound sign. This is kind of like the admin mode, or the mode where we can actually make changes to the switch. We're then going to look at, we're going to issue the command show run. This shows the running config on the switch. So when I hit the enter key, like the first page of the config shows, we see the name of the switch here, and then we start seeing some config under the ports. I'm going to hit the space bar. That'll show the next page. What I'm seeing under these ports 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so forth, is I see switch port access VLAN 10, switch port voice VLAN 20. These first handful of switch ports are configured that if a computer or PC plugs in, it'll put that device into a VLAN 10. If an IP phone plugs in, it'll put that device into VLAN 20. So these devices, computers, phones, would be separated at layer 2 here at the switch into their own virtual local area network. That way their traffic is separate and we have at least a basic level of security. Those two traffics would not mingle with each other. If I keep hitting the space bar, you see that goes the whole way down here to like port 20. Then we see 21, 22, we see some VLAN 30 config. That is going to be for the wireless access points. There's a couple VLANs set aside here for access points to plug in. So the wireless traffic is going to be separated from the desktop computers and the phones. So again, a basic level of security at layer 2 to separate them. If I keep going, we have trunking here. This is the config that says, hey, router, we have VLANs down here and their traffic is separated. And that lets the router know all these VLANs are coming at it, so the router should be aware. And we'll look at the router config here in just a minute. So at layer 2, we have any of these devices connected in here. The PCs, the phones, and eventually the wireless are all separated at layer 2 on their own virtual local area network. So again, kind of like a basic layer 2 security. Well, let's take a look at the router now. I'm going to open the router. I'm going to do the exact same thing. I'm going to do the command line interface tab up here. I'm going to hit the enter key, enable, and I'm going to do a show run again. I'm just going to look at the first page, if you will. I'm going to hit the space bar one time. And the first chunk up here is all DHCP config. Well, there's a couple different DHCP scopes configured or pools configured that we can hand out IP addresses to the PC, a different set of IP addresses to the voice over IP phones, and a different set of IP addresses to the Wi-Fi or the wireless users. And if I look kind of closely, I'll see 192.168 for all of these. But when I look closer at that third octet, I see 32 here, I see 64 here, and I see 128 here. Yeah, these three networks, these three desktop computers, IP phones, and wireless access points or wireless devices are now separated into different subnets. These are different layer 3 networks that we will have those devices separated into. So the switch is separating them out in layer 2. The router now is separating them out at layer 3. And this right here, this config is going to hand those addresses to those devices so that we don't need to key them in. If I keep going down here, I'm looking at, this is the interface configuration to get those devices in their own layer 3 subnet. There is a sub-interface created for VLAN 10, there's a sub-interface created for VLAN 20, and there's a sub-interface configured for VLAN 30. Again, that is to keep those devices separated at layer 3. They're in their own subnets, own layer 3 networks in this corporate site, if you will. If I keep going, this actually down here is some configuration for doing network address translation. So all these private addresses inside 192.168s will get translated out to the IP address that the ISP is giving us. So our private scheme in here will get translated, network address translation, into the addressing that the ISP wants us to use. That's what we're seeing at the last part of that config down there. So we see a bunch of stuff going on to make this work. So we have a network up and running and configured that PCs and phones are separated at layer 2. We have a spot allocated for wireless at layer 2, and then up here at the router we have different subnets to keep these separated at layer 3, and we have a spot allocated to add in that wireless network for its own layer 3 network. That's what's already in place here. All right, so let's keep going. Now let's check what kind of IP addressing the computers and phones and things get. So down here under the PC, we're going to open the desktop, open the IP config tab, set it for DHCP, and see what we get. So I'm going to open this PC, IP config, DHCP, let it pull up an IP address, and I see it's pulling up a 192.168.32. That's the subnet that it belongs to. Excellent. I'm going to close this one out, do the same thing on this guy, and make sure this is picking up a 32. And it is. So what we'll do is we're going to test, can we connect to or communicate with the router on this 32 network. So we're actually going to try to ping that 32.1. So opening up the command prompt, 192.168.32.1, that is the router interface. So it is able to communicate on that VLAN and on that layer 3 subnet up to the router. So the computers are in their own network able to communicate. Excellent. Now let's take a look at the phones. Now we didn't have any phone configuration on the router, but the phones are there and getting an IP. So if I hold my pointer over the phone, we should hopefully see, okay, it'll still be trying to get phone configuration, and it won't because we don't have that on the router. But if I hold my pointer over the phone, it should be picking up an IP address. And if it's not, what we're going to do is we're just going to kind of unplug the phone, plug the phone back in, let it boot up, and we'll do the same thing on the other guy. We'll go to the back here, unplug it, we'll plug it right back in, and kind of let it reboot. And I'm just going to speed up time over here a little bit. And then we'll hold our pointer over the phone, and we should see it picking up at least an IP, and we do. 192.168, 192.168.64.11, and we see on this guy over here, 192, still working on it, looks like. 192.168.64.12. So these are getting IP addresses from that 64 voice subnet. Now again, we don't have the IP phone configuration on the router, so they're not going to get a phone number and be able to call each other. But we're at least seeing that this switch configured with those VLANs, the PCs are getting an IP address in their own layer 3 subnet, and the phones are getting their own IP in their own layer 3 subnet, and these are separated from each other logically at layer 2 here and layer 3 on the router, which is really, really cool. Now that we have that in place, we should make sure that we actually can communicate with the ISP over here. So we're going to do some pings and traces and browses over to the CNT.org. And I'm just going to open up my PC here. I'll open up the command prompt. I'm going to try to ping straight to CNT.org. The first one or two might fail. That's all right. If need be, we'll reissue it. The first one through might take a minute. So I'm going to try to open the other PC over here as well and get it rolling. You can do it, little computers. There we go. We're getting a reply. So we have communication all the way over the ISP. We'll let this enroll over here for a minute. And meanwhile, I'm going to open up. There we go. We're getting some replies over there. I'm going to open up my browser here, and I'm going to try to browse to the CNT.org. I might be trying to max out the capability of our packet tracer right now. So I think I need to be a little patient. There we go. We're opening up the website over there, the CNT.org. And I'll do the same thing on this guy as well. And just verifying that we have full connectivity over to the ISP. And that way we'll know if we add the wireless and later we don't have connectivity, it's probably the wireless network that isn't right, not this part of the network over here. You can do it, little computer. You can do it. I think I was going to try to close this one to see if that'll help. Minimize the amount of processing that our packet tracer needs to do. There we go. And we got connectivity over there. Good. Okay, so now that we have that, we can look at adding in our wireless access point and getting it configured in the network. Okay, so we're going to get a straight through cable from the access point to the switch, and we need to go to the port 21. If you remember, on the switch there were 21 and 22 were configured for VLAN 30, so we need to make sure when we cable this guy in, we'll go from the port 0 here over to the switch. I'm going to click on the switch, and I'm going to go to port 21. That is one of the ports configured for the wireless network. We'll let that negotiate. We'll go to the physical closet, or the physical side of the network, and let's go into the closet and look at the access point cabled in. So I'm going to go to the physical tab up here, Home City. Here's our corporate office. I have the access point here in the hallway. If I zoom out a little bit, it's kind of like in the hallway, and I have my wireless devices over here. If I go in, and this is the desktops and so forth in different offices. If we go into the closet, I'll zoom in a little bit. We'll zoom into the switch this here. I should see that port 21, and I do have a blinky link light on. So there's our access point in the VLAN 30 port on the switch, cabled in, and should be, up and ready to go, if you will. So we'll go back to our logical view over here, and we see some blinky link lights. Good. We'll now go in and configure the access point. So we'll go to the config tab and take a peek. We hear the config tab. The port 0 is basically the connection into the switch side, if you will. We're going to go port 1. This is the side where we actually plug in the wireless configuration. So we'll come in here and put Wi-Fi users. Watch your typing. It is case sensitive. This does matter. We'll leave it on channel 6. We're going to dial it back to 150 meters, so it's not as big of a range. And we'll do WPA2 pre-shared key, and we're using password 1. Again, this is all case sensitive, so watch your typing. So now that all that's plugged in, I will go out here just kind of to the physical side to make sure, I'm just kind of making sure that gets applied. I'll close that out. And now what we can do is worry about connecting in some of our devices to the network. Next podcast, we'll start connecting the devices in the network and getting them communicating.